Welcome. Hi,
Hello,
Ira.
how are you? Good, good, good. We had a nice talk when I was in Israel. Yeah, we absolutely did. Nice to see you now back here. How's everything? Welcome. Yeah, everything's good. Terrific. So, good evening to all of you, first of all, here in front of me, and good evening to everyone on Zoom. I hope that you're doing something more useful than just looking at me, eating dinner, drinking something, sitting comfortably. As I tell my students, anytime they can eat and drink in my class, this way they talk less and I can talk more. It's a pleasure to be back here in Buffalo, and with permission from Rabbi Bergman, I have to admit that he asked me to speak about Yom Kippur, but I'll be honest with you, I can't just speak about Yom Kippur this year. The reason I can't just speak about Yom Kippur this year is I'm Israeli. And I don't think I have to tell anyone here, a community that supports Israel and cares about Israel and is worried about Israel all the time, that you understand very well that Israel is in a situation that, in my opinion, is far worse than anything we've experienced in the decades that Israel has been in existence. And I say that as one that lived through the first Intifada, the second Intifada, the Rabin assassination, and many other challenges that we've had, including, unfortunately for me and for the country, a terrible, terrible tragedy that hit Efrat, where I live, this past Pesach. And as I've done all year, I'd like to dedicate the words of Torah, with your permission, Rabbi Bergman, to Lucy, Maya, and Rina D, Zichronam Livracha, who were brutally murdered on Pesach, my dear neighbors, who I miss very much.
We spoke about them quite a lot here.
And we spoke about them a lot, so I think it's very appropriate then that I dedicate all the words of Torah to them, and obviously the jokes and everything else is not dedicated to them. That's on my responsibility. But it's a terrible tragedy. I don't think any of us who knew them well are totally out of it. I'm definitely not. But unfortunately, we're used to having people killed because they're Jewish throughout history. And Israel, of its 75 years, is no exception to that. What is an exception is what's happening in the last few months in Israel, where Jew and Jew can't talk to each other. Jew and Jew can't argue as Jews have argued, with civility, with common and mutual respect. And I am very worried about the country at this point, and I want to put it into the perspective of Yom Kippur because I don't deal with politics. I don't believe that the organization that I represent, Sohar, ever will deal with politics, despite the, I have to say, many offers to get into the political game. None of us have that particular aspiration. What I want to do is put it into context of Yom Kippur and ask one simple question about Yom Kippur. What is the goal of this day? And the answer is there's many goals, but I want to pinpoint one. Is the goal of this day unity or not? Meaning, if a person who cares about Judaism goes through Yom Kippur and actually does everything he or she is supposed to do, are they supposed to come out of it with a feeling of, well, we should be united or not? Is that part of Yom Kippur or not? Because on the surface of it, Yom Kippur is about my sins, confessing for what I did wrong, how I can do better. It doesn't seem like it lends itself to the question of unity. But allow me to do what I always do when I come to Buffalo, and that is make trouble.
You have that luxury because you leave.
I leave in a few hours, so I have that luxury, Rabbi Bergman says. He's right. I can make trouble, and then when you all scream, you'll scream at the rabbi. You won't scream at me. The truth of the matter is, in my opinion, that's exactly the goal of the day amongst many goals. And allow me to explain what I mean. We have an interesting halacha in the code of Jewish law, right? Not on Yom Kippur, but on Erev Yom Kippur. The code of Jewish law says that Yom Kippur can atone for all sins that we did with God. So if we didn't keep Shabbos properly, if we ate non-kosher food or things like that, anything that has to do with what we call ritualistic Judaism, Yom Kippur is going to atone if we properly confess. But Yom Kippur doesn't atone for sins that we've done against each other. So says the code of Jewish law, and I quote, laws of Erev Yom Kippur, you're supposed to go and ask forgiveness to those that you wronged. And obviously, you will be asked forgiveness for people that wronged you. Why does the code of Jewish law bring this as a law of Erev Yom Kippur? After all, it's true throughout the year. It was probably true even more so on Erev Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah would be no exception to that. And these days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we're saying Avinu Malkeinu, long slichos. Why not also say, hey, by the way, don't say slichos only. When you finish going to shul and he wronged someone, ask for forgiveness. How come Erev Yom Kippur is the place that the Code of Jewish Law brought this law? I would like to suggest the following interpretation based on one of the best sitcoms that were ever aired on TV. Okay, you thought I was going to quote a Rambam, a Gemara. No, I'm quoting a sitcom. I don't know if you know the sitcom, The West Wing. One of the best sitcoms that ever aired about the President of the United States. There is a scene there where they have a very weighty question that they're dealing with. I don't recall the question. And all the advisors are sitting around the president. His name in the show was President Bartlett. And they're all sitting. And at one point, after they ate a big dinner, the president says, you know, someone at the dinner told me something interesting. He said, the day before Yom Kippur is also important. It's a day in which you would try to atone for the sins that you did against your fellow man. So we had two Jewish advisors, as many presidents do, and they all say, yeah, what's the name of that day again? Erev Yom Kippur, yes. Says the president, it's amazing. Before you come before God, you have to make sure you're okay with man. And he was 100% right. Before you come before God, you have to make sure that everything's okay with each other. How do you come to God, the lofty God, the Almighty, before making sure that everything's okay around you? And indeed, maybe this is one of the many interpretations, the famous pasuk of Ki bayom hazeh yechaper alechem letaher etchem mikol chatoteichem, because on this day, Yom Kippur, God will purify you from all your sins. Lifnei Hashem, before Hashem titaru. Before Hashem can mean I'm standing before God. It can also mean chronologically. Before I come before God, I better make sure everything's okay with the people around me. Now, how do I know that the West Wing was correct? Because that law was brought as a law of Erev Yom Kippur. But it doesn't just come in a vacuum. Let's go to another law of Erev Yom Kippur. Erev Yom Kippur, we ultimately have a Gemara about a great rabbi. His name was Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva never left the study hall. His wife was an amazing woman. We know her name, Rachel. And Rachel or Rachel took care of the house. And indeed, Rabbi Akiva never got up from the study hall except for twice a year. On Erev Pesach, in order to make sure his children take a nap before the Seder. And on Erev Yom Kippur, to make sure they ate before the fast. Now, let me ask you a question. Every night he wasn't there at bath time. Every night he wasn't there to do homework with them. Somehow Rachel took care of the house. Why is it that she couldn't take care of making sure they eat on Erev Yom Kippur? I want to give my following interpretation. Before you come before God, you got to make sure everything's okay with the people around you. The people around you start with your own family. After all, we have a law that a man is obligated to respect his wife more than himself. Mechabda yoter migufo. It doesn't mean that you say you're amazing, you're a sweetheart. It means you have to physically help her. Before he buys a present for himself, he has to buy a present for his wife. That's what I do every time I go into Walmart. I always make sure to buy a present for my wife first before I take things that I buy for myself. When I bought that shirt, when I didn't have one, I bought it only for myself. That was already my wife's orders. But when it comes to presents, she goes first. That law basically says, don't come into Yom Kippur in a vacuum. Make sure everything's okay with the people around you. Who are the first circle around you? Your family. So he didn't go home to make sure they ate. After all, he didn't make sure they ate 364 days a year. He didn't even make sure they ate on Yom Kippur itself. After all, they're kids, they have to eat. But on Erev Yom Kippur, it was more important than studying Torah. He has to go home and make sure that everything's okay. And what better way to make sure everything's okay than with a meal where everyone sits around the table? That's where we get close to one another. Maybe this will explain one of the many, many, many reasons why there's a mitzvah to do what on Erev Yom Kippur? not just to ask forgiveness, not just to stand up from the study hall and have a meal. There's a mitzvah to eat on Erev Yom Kippur. There was rabbis that thought that there's such a mitzvah to eat that every moment of Erev Yom Kippur you have to eat. Now, if you do that, you're going to plot. So what's the solution? They used to have a piece of gum in their mouth the whole day. I think Rav Soloveitchik already said that's utterly disgusting and ridiculous, but you should know there is such a thing. Why do you eat on Erev Yom Kippur? One interpretation is to get ready for the fast. Another interpretation is we're supposed to eat on Yom Kippur. It's a Yom Tov, but we can't, so we eat on Erev Yom Kippur. I want to give my third interpretation. It's a day of camaraderie with the people around you. What better way to do that than to obligate you to have a meal together? And therefore, the meal before Yom Kippur is not just to prepare for the fast. Then it would look like the meal before Tisha B'Av. It's a meal where we have a challah and honey, and we have proper chicken soup and whatnot to prepare, not just for the fast, but to have a camaraderie around us. So what I said until now is the Erev Yom Kippur is the day where we're supposed to have unity. First and foremost, by asking forgiveness for those that we wronged. Secondly, by getting closer to the people around us by having a meal together. And thus, Rabbi Akiva made sure to come home for that. Now we finally got the shul. So we asked forgiveness, hopefully, from who we wronged. We got close to our family. Now we've come to shul. You may say, oh, now that I'm in shul, it's really not about anyone else, it's about me. Forget about unity. Unity is achieved. Now we're in shul. Tell me, what is the first sentence that the Chazan says on this holy day? You know, Kol Nidre, the shul is packed, people dressed in white, solemnity in the air. People are scared to make jokes, and rightfully so. No, what is the first paragraph that he says? You would have asked me, I never come to shul, I'd say, Shema Yisrael, something along those lines. What does he say? I'll help you out. Kol Nidre service starts. Ark is opened. Solemnity in the air. Al da'at hamakom, al da'at hakahal. With the acquiescence of God and with the acquiescence of the people around me. Not just God, the people around me. You already see where I'm going. B'yeshiva shel mala, b'yeshiva shel mada. Sitting in the yeshiva up in heaven and the yeshiva down here. Anu, we, matirin lihitpalel ma'avar yanim. We allow you to daven with the sinners. That's an appropriate way to start Yom Kippur. That's like saying, hello, everyone. Even though the shul is only open to members, we allow everyone in, including the lowlifes, including the criminals, including everyone that's wronged us. Why not? That's the way to start Yom Kippur? The answer is yes. The whole day of Erev Yom Kippur is to get close to one another. So what better way to start Yom Kippur than to say, we would like this davening to be open, not just for those who are close to us, but to those that feel very far from us. Why do they feel far? Because they're sinners. We invite them in as well. Yom Kippur, everyone's invited. As a matter of fact, that's based on a Gemara in Masechet Ta'anit, when there's a drought in Israel, which once upon a time, as you all know, was indeed a very clear and present danger. They used to make an ad hoc fast to ask God for rain. Then they would have a public mincha service in the street. And they would, once again, the Mishnah says, they have to make sure that everyone's there, including the sinners. You want something from God? You make sure you're unified. You want something from God on this Yom Kippur? You want him to forgive you. You want him to totally wipe you clean from your slate. You better be united. And the way to do it is to say, Anu matirin lihitpalel, not just with the religious, not just with the non-religious, ima varyanim, the sinners. They're all invited in. So we basically said until now that Erev Yom Kippur is a day to get close to one another. First, by asking forgiveness and putting down any barriers that we had between us. Secondly, by having meals together. And thirdly, by coming to shul and making that statement before you start Kol Nidre. Before you start Yom Kippur, we allow everyone to come daven with us. Okay, so now we're unified. Thank you. Now we can go into the real McCoy, Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is about being like angels. Yom Kippur is about getting to spiritual heights. All this is true. Let me ask you a question. Is there any unity on Yom Kippur itself? I'll admit. Is there any unity on Yom Kippur itself? So we clap, we always say a Jew can only make a fist when he's about to clap on his chest. No. That's it? What do you say? Let me ask you a question. Have you ever, at the end of the Avoda, when on Musaf we talk about what the Kohen Gadol used to do in the temple, it's a long service, that Musaf, right? So we finally sing Emet Mana Hedar Haya Kohen Gadol, and then unfortunately we say there's no temple, and we don't have the sacrificial service, and unfortunately our Yom Kippur is a bit empty. What do I mean? Baruch Hashem, the shul is full, wonderful chazan, good davening, air conditioning's working, but no Beit HaMikdash. Let me tell you a little something you can use at your seders. Why is it twice a year the kind of custom is to say L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim? At the end of the Seder, at the end of Yom Kippur. Why don't we say at the end of Rosh Hashanah and Simchas Torah? We always miss Jerusalem. How come only then? Because both of those holidays, there's something very, very important missing. Pesach, we don't have a Korban Pesach. We don't have this Pesach sacrifice. It was part and parcel of the Seder. It was a very major part of the Seder, and it's missing. Yom Kippur, we have a lot, but we don't have a Kohen Gadol, a Grand Kohen, and we don't have the sacrificial work. Therefore, at the end, we say, we've gained a lot. L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim. Ladies and gentlemen, at the end of the Avoda, we say, unfortunately, we don't have a temple. We don't have the sacrificial service, but we do have Yom Kippur. And what does it say Yom Kippur is? It goes through a list. Yom Asur B'Achila, a day that we don't eat. Yom Asur B'Shtiyah, a day we don't drink. Yom Asur B'Ne'ilat Sandal, we don't wear leather shoes. On and on and on. What's next on the list? You remember, Rav Uri? You have a machzor here for Yom Kippur? I want to read it from the machzor because you remember it?
I don't know the order. I don't know the order, but you know what to say.
I'll wait for Rav Uri to come back, but quite frankly, it's something that you seem is totally out of place. Why is it out of place? Because after saying today is a day where we don't eat, we don't drink, you should have left it at that. You should have said a day that we confess, a day that we daven. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, there's a line that seems totally and utterly out of place. And I'll show you the line from the machzor. You remember what it is?
Anointing?
Anointing? No, it doesn't say that. Good guess. That already was said. You're right. Here we go. I want to read it from the machzor so everyone will believe me because you think I'm making this up. So here it is in the machzor. So we say, Al Kain Berachamecha Harabim, and therefore with your great mercy you gave us this Yom Kippur, this day that you atone for our sins, this day that we don't eat and we don't drink, and etc., etc. All of a sudden, after the sandal, Yom Simat Ahava Vereyut. Anyone want to translate? The day of putting love and camaraderie. Next, Yom Azivat Kina'ah V'Tacharut. A day that we leave any jealousy and what's Tacharut? When someone has a monopoly, he has no. Anyone? What's the opposite of a monopoly?
Yeah.
Competition. The day that we leave Kina'ah, jealousy, and Tacharut, competition. Can I read it from the article? Make sure I'm correct here. A day of instituting love and friendship. A day of forsaking jealousy and competition. There it is. Hebrew and English. I didn't make it up. Right here. Page 574 in the machzor. So on Yom Kippur, when you're very hungry and your head's beginning to hurt, you're on page 574, right? Around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, you'll remember that someone told you, take a look. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, we talk about love, camaraderie, and jealousy, all gone. What does that have to do with Yom Kippur? If you follow what I said, of course, that's everything to do with Yom Kippur. You want God to take care of you, you better be okay with each other. God loves his children as long as his children sit at the same table. And Yom Kippur lends itself to that by the preparations we made on Erev Yom Kippur, asking for forgiveness, eating together, starting the day with all the sinners are welcome. But even on Yom Kippur, we have that. Can anyone tell me why? Let's think about this. During the year, what separates us in a shul? You know, the old joke, the rabbi comes in on Rosh Hashanah and he says, you people are sinners, you have to confess. People are talking during davening, you better stop. And finally, a lady looks at her friend and says, for this, I got all dressed up. Gentlemen and ladies, Yom Kippur is a day in which you can have a lot of money or a little money, a big house, a small house, a full refrigerator, a not so full refrigerator. All of us are in the same camp on Yom Kippur. You can have fancy shoes or non-fancy shoes. We're all wearing non-leather shoes on this day. You should know that there's a point of view of the Gra, based on the Rambam, that says that you shouldn't wear any shoes that actually secure your foot. So even non-leather shoes would be a problem. So outside, there's nothing to talk about how you're supposed to walk home in your socks. And maybe in shul, everyone should just walk around in socks. I know my Rebbe, Rav Amital, he was the chazan for Kol Nidre Musaf Neila. He wore socks for those particular times. I thought it was because of his back, his feet. He was an older man. Maybe it was because of this. I didn't ask him. But we all wear non-leather shoes. In other words, you have to go out of your way to find a cheap shoe for Yom Kippur. Makes no difference how much money you have in your bank account. Next, what do we wear? White. So you can have red dresses, purple dresses, blue shirts. White. We all wear white. What can be something that unites us more than all of us wearing the same color? White. That is the day, by the way, that shidduchim used to be made. Because it's interesting. We think of Yom Kippur as a day in which we're in shul all day. Once upon a moon, they weren't in shul all day because the sacrificial work finished at a certain time in the afternoon. And then they had a few hours left. It wasn't like today. So what did they do? They made shidduchim. Everyone's here. So they made shidduchim. They made matches between men and women. What did the girls wear? White. Everyone was equal. You want to get to know a girl, don't look at her dress, look at her. Look at her face and decide, do you have a mutual relationship about to be formed or not? Let's put that aside. We all wear white. We all wear non-leather shoes. We can have an expensive brisket at home or a cheap chicken. No one's eating. You can drink water or Gatorade, depending on how fancy schmancy you are. No one's drinking. Therefore, you understand this passage in the davening. When we start saying it's a day in which, and I quote, Yom Asur B'Achila, Yom Asur B'Shtiyah, today we don't eat, we don't drink, we don't wash, etc. Since we don't do all these things, it's a day of Ahava. Very.
As contrasted with Sinat Chinam.
So I have to tell you, and I said this to someone who's on the Zoom, Paul and Sharon Karitsky, who I met with earlier. I quoted, not myself, Rav Shapira. Have you heard of Rav Shapira, who founded the Daf Yomi?
Sure.
He died in 1933, very young. He founded the big yeshiva called the Lublin Yeshiva. He had a great witticisms in general, but this is one of his witticisms. He said, what's left from Bayit Sheni? What's left from the second temple? There's no temple left. The building is gone. There's no altar. There's no sacrifices. There's no artifacts. What's left? He said, there's one thing left, Sinat Chinam. That we have left. Okay, I'll quote another person for you. There was a gentleman that lived in Efrat, Mr. Achi.
Sinat Chinam is baseless hatred.
Yes, I'm sorry. Sinat Chinam is baseless hatred. That's still left. But think about Yom Kippur. Because all these things are forbidden, there's nothing that differentiates between us. There's nothing that differentiates too much between us and angels at that moment, because just like angels don't eat, we don't eat. Yes, I know. We're all counting the hours till the end of the fast. There was a great rabbi who went through a heart attack and afterwards had to go through rehabilitation in a rehabilitation center in Israel. So a few rabbis came to visit him, and they asked him, how is it to be here? And he said, the rehabilitation center is like a typical Jew on Yom Kippur. He said, what? Rehabilitation center is like a Jew on Yom Kippur? He said, yes. You walk around with slippers, and all you think about is the next meal. If you think about it, since on Yom Kippur, you can't eat and you can't drink, there's nothing that differentiates between us at that moment. Rich, poor, we don't eat, we don't drink. Rich, poor, we all have the same kinds of shoes. Rich, poor, we still have all the white. That's all we wear. So basically, at the height of Yom Kippur, we say to God, this is the day of pure unity with the Jewish people. And therefore, you can well understand now how come it crept into our service that we have at the end of this part of Musaf, the Asara Harugei Malchut. We talk about the 10 rabbis who were murdered at a certain time by the Romans, 2nd century, 3rd century. I forgot what it's called in fancy historic English, some kind of massacres, but they were all killed in terrible deaths. We read about it. Why do we read about it? I'll tell you why we read about it. It says so in the prayer. You know, when I published my first book, Daven Your Age, I had a different title for the book, but the publisher said, if you use that title, we're not publishing the book. What was my title? I wanted to call it Pay Attention, an adult guide to the prayer service. They said, Rabbi, you can't call your book Pay Attention. Why? You're reprimanding the people right on the cover. You could say it in the introduction, but you can't call the book Pay Attention. So I didn't call it Pay Attention. But if you have to summarize my 2 books on davening, my daily podcast on davening and whatnot, I say it's all about one thing: pay attention. So I want to pay attention to the davening. Here I am in shul, Yom Kippur, nothing better to do, no lunch at home. And I'm looking at this long piyut that talks about the 10 rabbis that were brutally murdered by the Romans. And I'm asking myself, why is it in our Yom Kippur service? I'll say it differently. There was a Sephardic rabbi who I just heard recently in Israel in our Tzohar conference. We make a big conference every summer, and he said he always davened with the Sephardim. We never davened with Ashkenaz. But one slichot night, the first slichot, an Ashkenazic shul asked him to speak. So he came. So in order to come, he wanted to prepare himself. So he took out an Ashkenazi slichot, and he started to look at one of the piyutim, because he knows how to analyze a piyut. So he takes out an Ashkenazic slichot, and he says he doesn't remember the piyut. All it said, he remembered that every word, every sentence ended with im. And then there was a certain sentence that said, Anachnu nishchatim, nechnakim, veneheragim. We are butchered, we are choked to death, and we are murdered, if that's not good enough. And he said, is this keynote of Tisha B'Av?
Right.
Or is this Yom Kippur slichot? Same question here. How come in the Art Scroll Siddur, page 586, there's a whole prayer about the 10 rabbis that were murdered? What does that have to do with Yom Kippur? We already said Yizkor earlier. So why is it here? There's an answer. You pay attention. I'll read you the answer. So it talks about these rabbis, and it talks about the fact that the Kohen Gadol at the time said, let me ask God if this is from him, if this is a punishment. And God said to him, yes, it is. Does anyone remember why? Anyone? I quote to you. I want to find the exact words, but here are the words. The words are, and I quote, it's because of the sin of the shoes. What is the sin of the shoes? Not that people wore leather shoes on Yom Kippur. No, for that you don't get killed.
We spoke about this. I'm sure you could test who was listening.
No, tell me what it's about. Anyone remember what the rabbi spoke about? I quote.
It was a couple years ago.
A couple years ago. It wasn't.
No, he said, where are your ancestors that sold their brother? Who sold their brother?
Yeah.
Remember Yosef and the brothers? They didn't get along?
Yeah.
They sold the brother. They sold him to a bunch of merchants who were Arabs. And what they get in return? New shoes. At that time, there wasn't money, so it was all barter. So they sold Yosef for slavery. In return for it, they got new shoes. Now you're going to suffer because of it. Tell me something. What was the sin of Yosef and his brothers? You have to sum it up in one phrase. What was it? Disunity. Baseless hatred, or hatred that wasn't baseless, but hatred it was. It's right here in the Machzor. That's why we insert it. God saying, if you didn't pay attention a few passages ago, that today's a day of unity, then I'm going to give it to you really hard. You know why these rabbis were killed? Because there once upon a time, there was brothers that couldn't get along. So there was differences of opinion. Yosef was dreaming of sheaves of wheat to make bread and not do what the family did at the time, and that is to be a bunch of shepherds. And he was dreaming of the stars and the moon, and the brothers, instead of saying, all right, we'll have a conversation, we'll have a disagreement. You know, you're Republican, I'm Democratic, we'll sit about. No. The brothers said, if you think that way, you're out. They thought of killing him. Then they said, you know, we won't kill him, we'll do something better. We'll sell him into slavery. That's like saying today, you know what? I won't kill my enemy, I'll send him into captivity. We're now 50 years since the Yom Kippur War. So there's a lot of movie footage that is coming out already and in the next few days. If you want to look on YouTube, you'll find a lot of footage that's the first time seen. The one that breaks my heart the most is not just the 2,600 soldiers that were killed because our leaders were blind, but rather when they talk about the people that were taken into captivity and what they went through. It's worse than anything. And the Gemara already says captivity is worse than anything. Therefore, when a woman gets married to a man, one of the many conditions in the ketubah is that he will redeem her from captivity. So think about it. Because of disunity, all this happened. God is saying to us on Yom Kippur, if you, God forbid, leave shul and start with your disunity again, after achieving unity by everyone looking the same and dressing the same and whatnot, remember what happened. So, to sum up, Yom Kippur, if you think about it, Erev Yom Kippur into Yom Kippur, it's all about one thing. God says, I want you to be a group. You can disagree. You can say judicial reform, yes or no. It's legitimate to have Republican and Democrat, but you're not two nations. And what's happening in Israel today is, unfortunately, people saying we have to choose between being Jewish and being Democratic, which should be no choice. It should go together. It's not mutually exclusive. What's happening in Israel today, to my dismay, is that people start saying you have to make a choice. Do you want to be Jewish or Israeli? I find that to be a terrible, terrible, terrible thing to say, let alone unnecessary. You can be Jewish and you can be Israeli. You can disagree with each other, but do it around the same Shabbos table. Not like I heard recently, a family tells me that they wanted to take the whole family, the sons, the daughters-in-laws, the grandchildren, away for Pesach. And they found a facility that they're going to go to, a very nice hotel. And someone in the family said, we're not coming. Why aren't you coming? It's a great opportunity not to cook for Pesach. Go away the whole Pesach, because the hotel is called the Trump Hotel. We won't be caught dead in a hotel called the Trump Hotel. So, you know, they want to cook for Pesach and not go to the Trump Hotel because in the hate, let them do what they want. That's what we've come to? That we can't come together because we disagree on this or on that? Yom Kippur, if you understand it profoundly, is all about one thing. How are we one? At the end of the day, the Jewish people and all its so-called denominations find themselves in one place on Yom Kippur, in shul. If you think about it, even people that don't go to shul respect the day. Golda Meir, if I quoted the Yom Kippur War, once said that, you know, when a Jew totally assimilated, if they feel nothing on Yom Kippur. You know, she had witticisms of many sorts, but this one was a very profound one. My famous witticism, I have to say off topic, of Golda Meir, it's in the new movie that just came out, which I advise you to watch. It's really amazing. If you know the Yom Kippur War. Henry Kissinger meets Golda Meir and says, you better know that I'm first and foremost an American, second of all, the Secretary of State, and only third on the list is I'm Jewish. So Golda Meir, not batting an eyelash, says to Henry Kissinger, you know, Mr. Secretary of State, in Israel, we read from right to left. So to sum up, asking forgiveness, eating together, coming to shul and saying all the sinners are welcome, wearing approximately the same shoes and wearing the same clothes, all should bring us to a day of unity. Pure unity of the Jewish people. Of course there's differences in opinion. Of course there's differences in our faces and the way we look. But at the end of the day, we go radical to look the same and feel the same so that we will achieve unity as we get out of this day. And the most important thing from my perspective is not just Yom Kippur, but is what we take home with us. You know, it's fascinating. In the avoda of the Kohen Gadol, he changed clothes 5 times on Yom Kippur. He started with gold, went to the mikvah and put on white, then went to the mikvah and put on gold, then went to the mikvah and put on white, and then went to the mikvah and put on gold. Right? Okay. One of the reasons that he put on white at the end, the 4th time, the 4th unit, was to do one thing. In one of the former units, he took a shovel filled with the ketoret, the incense sacrifice, brought it into the holies of holies, made smoke, and did what he did in there. You know why he put on white in the 4th unit? To go into this holies of holies and take it out. Now let me ask you a question. Why couldn't he take it out when he went in the first time? Why did he have to go to the mikveh, dry himself off? We read about this. Goes to the mikveh, dries himself off, puts on white clothing, goes in order to just take out a shovel. That's an avoda. That's a big work, a sacrificial service. That's what we're praying to God to bring back. The Kohen Gadol took out the shovel. That's like saying you ate a good meal and a napkin fell on the floor. So you get up and you say, with the help of God, I am picking up the napkin and putting it in the wastebasket. And you say it dramatically. Why is that part of the work of the Kohen Gadol? Answer: because it's not just about what you do in the holies of holies. It's what you do when you take the holies of holies home with you. Taking out the shovel was telling to the Kohen Gadol, take the spiritual experience of Yom Kippur with you back home. Therefore, the Rambam in his code says that when the Kohen Gadol finished his work, halach lebeito. Why did he say he went to his house? Of course he went home. Job is over. And what do we do after Yom Kippur? We go home. It's not like God has to tell us to go home. Answer: bring what you got from Yom Kippur back home. Therefore, the Ramah, the Code of Jewish Law, says that after Yom Kippur, you should eat in a merry mood. And he quotes a pasuk from Kohelet that we'll read on Sukkot. I think you're going to read it on Shmini Atzeret, but I can't read it on Shmini Atzeret because I come from Israel, and my Shmini Atzeret and Simchas Torah, there's no depressing Milgillah than Kohelet. You can't read that on Simchas Torah. So you're going to read it on Shmini Atzeret. I'll read it on the first day of Sukkot. In Kohelet, there's a pasuk. Lech echol b'simcha lachmecha. Go and eat with joy your bread. Ushtei b'leiv tov et yeinecha. And go and drink your wine with a hearty heart. Why? Ki kfar ratzah Elokim et ma'asecha. Because God has found favor, you found favor in the eyes of God. The Code of Jewish Law brings us about the meal that we break the fast. Now again, he didn't have to tell us to break the fast. What? Of course we're going to break the fast. The fast is over. We break. What did you do after Tisha B'Av? You broke the fast. There was no halacha in Shulchan Aruch that says after the fast you have to break your fast. Of course you will. You're hungry. You're thirsty. Answer: the most important thing is, what do you take out of this day back home? And what's a better way of testing that than to see how do you eat and how do you drink together after Yom Kippur? How do you eat and how do you drink together after Yom Kippur? As Rav Chaim Drukman, Zichrono Levracha, used to say, it's no big deal to be an angel on Yom Kippur. It's much harder, Lihiyot Ben Adam Kol HaShana, to be a human being after Yom Kippur. Or as Nachama Leibovich used to say, and I quote, in school, they taught me that you're supposed to be a very good girl between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the 10 days of repentance and whatnot. I believe it's as equally important, she said, to be a good girl between Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah.
Right.
You understand the witticism?
Mm-hmm.
Ladies and gentlemen, Yom Kippur is about achieving unity as a people through everything we do. In my opinion, there's no better way to say it than saying be like an angel. Because when the Jewish people are unified, at that moment of Yom Kippur, there really isn't too much that differentiates between us and angels. And indeed, if we take Yom Kippur to heart, then hopefully we'll come out of it and say we'll disagree. We'll have debates. They're part and parcel of being Jewish. 2 Jews, 5 opinions. That is part and parcel of being a Jew. You want to know how to prove Judaism? You have to make sure the person knows how to argue. But knowing how to argue means you're my brother and you're my sister, and we argue about many different things, but you're still my brother and you're still my sister. And that is part and parcel of being Jewish. Because if not, I don't know how we're going to say so many passages of this machzor. How are we supposed to say, Anu matirin li palel ima avaryanim, we allow us to daven with sinners, if we can't even get along on other things? What are we going to do? Change it. We allow ourselves to daven with sinners except for those that support the judicial reform or don't support the judicial reform. I don't think we'll be able to say it's a day in which we left behind kin'ah v'tacharut, jealousy and competition, if we don't understand that unity means not uniformity. It means being one. Yom Kippur gives us a radical example of that. But we have to take it home with us. Just like the Kohen Gadol went home, and that's a halacha. Just like we break the fast, and that's a halacha. Let's see if we can take it home with us to the entire year. If indeed the Jewish people will go through Yom Kippur properly this year, I have great hopes for the future. Because I have great hopes that the Jewish people will argue, and yet will do it as brothers and sisters. I hope and pray before God that just like we're praying for so many things at this time of the year, we pray for this too. And maybe, and I'll just end with this, that's the reason why we added something to our Amidah that makes no sense. What do we say at the beginning of our Amidah, our silent prayer? We always start with 3 blessings every day of the year of praise, correct? Praise, request, and thanksgiving. Those are the 3 parts of the Amidah. Why is it in the middle of the section of praise, we all of a sudden say to God, Zachreinu l'chaim, remember us for life. Melech hafetz b'chayim, a God that yearns for life. V'chotveinu b'sefer hachayim, and write us down in the book of life. Why do we all of a sudden request in the middle of praise? So many have said, we have no choice. We're so nervous at this time of the year, we just can't. We blurt it out. I'd like to give a different interpretation. You know what the praise of God is? Not just God, you're great, you're wonderful, you're almighty, you bring rain, you know when people will, who shall live, who shall die. God, you know what praise is? A praise for you? That we'll have a life. That we'll have a life together. Zochreinu, plural. Remember all of us, l'chaim, to a life. If we take Yom Kippur to heart, I hope we'll come out of it and say, we're one nation. Every one of us is Jewish and Israeli. Every one of us is democratic and Jewish. And we'll argue and we'll debate because that's what Jews will do. And yet we'll do it together. And thus, the Gemara says about Sukkot, just 5 days after Yom Kippur, Ru'uyin Kol Yisrael Leishev B'Sukkah Achat. If we take Yom Kippur to heart, all the Jewish people will be able to sit in one sukkah. Now, there's no sukkah that I know of that's big enough. It means all the Jewish people will feel comfortable in each other's sukkah. Thank you all very much for listening.
Thank you.
Wishing you all from the bottom of my heart, the K'tiva v'chatima tova, we should have a wonderful and good year together. First and foremost, together, a togetherness of life, a togetherness of health, and a togetherness of happiness and fulfillment.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for listening on Zoom as well.
So is unity
I think
intended to be a purpose or a primary purpose, or is it a natural